All right, we're about to dive into a story of just incredible wealth, some really devastating choices, and a collapse that you just don't see very often in modern history. We're going to break down the economic decisions that completely unraveled the nation of Venezuela, a country that was, believe it or not, once one of the richest in all of Latin America.
Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't a story about a nation destroyed by an invasion or some kind of civil war. This was a collapse from the inside. We are talking about a country that, not that long ago, was actually richer per person than Spain, Greece, or Israel. The contrast between then and now is just staggering, and it leaves you with one huge question.
And that right there, that's the puzzle we're here to solve. You know, it goes so much deeper than the headlines you might see. How does a country that is literally sitting on more oil than Saudi Arabia end up with empty grocery stores and a completely shattered economy? That is what we're going to unpack piece by painful piece. So, to really get it, we're going to start with the paradox of its oil wealth. Then we'll trace the specific policy decisions that went so wrong. We're going to see how all of that just spiraled into the absolute nightmare of hyperinflation, how outside shocks made a terrible situation even worse, and finally, what really crucial lessons we can all learn from this whole collapse.
Okay, so let's begin with the foundation of everything: oil. Venezuela's entire modern identity, its whole economy, it was all built on these vast reserves. And this created a paradox where its greatest strength, well, it would eventually become its greatest weakness. The oil boom back in the 70s just flooded the country with cash. It financed these massive public projects, a booming middle class. It really had a reputation for prosperity that was the envy of the entire region. This period of extreme wealth is so crucial because it really did set the stage for everything that came next.
And that total reliance on oil brings us to a core problem. Venezuela became the textbook definition of a petrostate. That's where your national budget, all your social programs, even the value of your currency are all tied to the crazy fluctuating price of one thing on the global market.
And I mean, the sheer scale of that dependency is mind-blowing. When around 95% of your export money is coming from a single source, the whole nation is basically a magnificent skyscraper built on a single pillar. And yeah, as long as that pillar stays strong, everything seems fine. But what happens when it starts to crack? So if that dependency was the crack in the foundation, what happens when the government itself starts taking a sledgehammer to it? Well, that's where we get to the policy mismanagement, a whole series of deliberate choices that turned a vulnerability into a full-blown catastrophe.
Now, these policy failures, they didn't happen in a vacuum. They actually fed into each other in this toxic cycle. You see, the price controls created shortages, right? Which the government then tried to solve by nationalizing industries. Well, that crippled production, which then required unsustainable spending to fill the gaps, which in turn was fueled by just rampant corruption. Let's break down how this chain reaction really worked.
Okay, first up, price controls. Now, the stated goal here was noble, right? Make essentials like food and medicine affordable for the poor. But the actual outcome was total economic chaos. When you force companies to sell things for less than they cost to make, you completely destroy any reason for them to produce anything. The result? Widespread shortages and a booming black market where those exact same goods were sold for crazy high prices. And then came the nationalizations, especially of the state oil company PDVSA. I mean, this was once a world-class company pumping out 3.5 million barrels a day. But after years of mismanagement, no investment, and putting political buddies in charge, production just collapsed. And here's the crucial point. They were systematically destroying their only major source of income.
So this brings us to the next stage. With oil money collapsing and government spending still through the roof, the government was trapped, and its solution would unleash one of the most extreme cases of hyperinflation in modern history. The logic is simple and absolutely deadly. If you don't have enough money to pay your bills, hey, just print more of it. But here's the thing. When you create money that isn't backed by any actual economic production, you don't create wealth. You just make every single dollar, or in this case, bolivar, worth less and less, faster and faster.
And this is the result. 1,370,000%. It's a number so big, it's almost impossible to comprehend. Prices were doubling every few weeks. This isn't just some economic statistic, it's the complete annihilation of value. It's the destruction of money itself.
And this quote just brings that insane number right back down to earth. This is the human cost. Just imagine everything you've ever worked for. Your retirement, your savings, all your dreams for your kids' future.
just evaporating into thin air. Hyperinflation is a thief that steals both your past and your future.
And the ripple effects were just devastating. The economy didn't just shrink, it imploded, contracting by about 75%. Basic things like food and medicine became luxuries. And as the country broke down, its people were forced to leave, creating one of the largest migration crises in the entire world.
But the disaster wasn't purely self-inflicted. While the country was being torn apart from the inside, a series of external shocks came along and delivered a final, devastating blow from the outside.
This timeline really shows the one-two punch that hit the already failing state. First, back in 2014, global oil prices just plummeted, cutting the government's main lifeline in half. Then came heavy international sanctions, which crippled their ability to sell oil and get access to global finance. These shocks landed on an economy that had absolutely zero resilience left.
So what do we take away from all of this? Well, in our final section, let's pivot from just explaining what happened to really understanding what this tragic story teaches us about economics, about governance, and about how fragile prosperity can actually be.
This is where the story becomes a really clear lesson in cause and effect. Each major policy failure maps directly to a fundamental economic principle that was just completely ignored. Relying too much on oil, that ignored the need for diversification. Price controls, they defied the logic that markets need accurate signals to work. And printing money, well, that was a catastrophic failure of the fiscal discipline you need for a stable currency.
So the key takeaways are these. First, Venezuela is a tragic modern example of what's called the resource curse, where a nation's greatest wealth actually becomes a liability. Second, it proves that without strong, independent institutions to act as guardrails, economies can just fly right off the rails. And, maybe most importantly, it shows us that these aren't just abstract policy debates, they have profound and devastating human costs.
And this right here is really the thesis of our entire explainer. This wasn't bad luck, it wasn't some kind of accident, it was a sequence of choices, deeply misaligned with sound economic principles that systematically unraveled a nation from the inside out. And that leaves us with one final forward-looking question. The path back for Venezuela is incredibly difficult. It's not just about fixing GDP numbers or inflation rates, it's about rebuilding the foundational trust between a people and the very economic principles that are supposed to provide a stable and prosperous future. And that is a challenge that goes far beyond any single slide.